And hello, welcome to the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up. Word is I'm going to be joined very soon by my good friend, Jeff Fritz, and we're going to be doing a .NET Conf web dev recap. So there's tons of new stuff that got announced at .NET Conf and just shipped recently, and so we're going to be talking about it. Let me angle my webcam a little better. Going off the screen there. All right. So let me see. And it is so cool to see all these people showing up from all around the world. That is one of the things I love best about .NET and my job and all that, is just getting to see all these friends from all around the world showing up. So, wow, this is amazing. Very cool. Hey, Janiscu, always good to see you. New Zealand from James Newton King. My goodness. Oh, wow. And it's Mr. Jeff Fritz.
Hello. How you doing there, sir?
I'm doing great. You have been a busy man lately. I mean,
I get around.
So I felt a little bad talking you into this, but I also felt like it'd be a lot of fun. We're just hanging out.
Yeah.
So
we're just doing
we are talking about what's new in web dev from .NET Conf. We're starting the show, as we always do, with community stand-up links or community links. And it's been a little while since we have done a show. So we've actually got a ton. Oh my goodness. I got to say hi to a few more friends here. We've got Iran. We've got Berlin. We've got Syria, Germany, more Germany, Serbia, Mexico City. It is just crazy around here. This is so cool. There's the Mexico City. Okay.
There you go. So, right. And for those that didn't pick up on this, maybe you're watching on YouTube, maybe you're watching on Facebook, on Facebook, on the Twitters. Mm-hmm. I just finished a stream. We were writing some software, targeting and working with Azure App Service, building containers. And John and I, we just ran a stream yesterday introducing folks to Blazor. We had .NET Conf a week or so before that. We've been a little busy. We've been getting around here.
Yeah, we did a 90-minute class, intro to Blazor. And and I'll be honest, I have been missing the .NET Community Stand-Up, as our friends have too. They're all rushing in to see the show. And it's really hard to line up other speakers around this time. A lot of people on vacation, busy with .NET Conf, busy doing documentation or fixes or whatever. So yeah, a lot. So yeah. So what were you doing on your stream, Jeff?
So I broadcast on Twitch, and something that we've been building and we've been showing for the last year actually is we've been building a website completely on Azure using Blazor, using Azure Functions, Azure static websites, and it highlights and shows Twitch clips. So this month, I made a commitment back in April, May. We raised money for St. Jude, and I made a commitment. If we raised more than $10,000 for St. Jude, I would spend the entire month of November coding in Node.js and JavaScript. And I thought that because I don't know if you know this, I'm not a JavaScript person. So I thought there's no way we're going to hit that. Well, we blew that right out of the water and crossed right into $13,000 raised for St. Jude. Amazing organization. Yeah. So I'm making good, and we're developing with Node, with JavaScript. We're showing how you can work with Azure using JavaScript. We put things in a container today, loaded it onto app service using a container. I actually store the container in GitHub package registry. So that's free, available to anybody to place NuGet packages, Docker packages, all the things. And I have that being downloaded and configured automatically whenever there's a change. And now on my channel, there's an extension down at the bottom, a Twitch extension that shows the most viewed clippers, the folks who have created the most viewed clips on my channel. Really cool stuff. And once we got past that pesky cores technology, that cross-origin resource sharing, right? Okay, I'm not the only one there, chat room.
No, it's terrible.
And you heard him.
Yep.
He's over there. So once we got past that, things just fell in line. Some great help from folks in the community and in the chat room. And I'm thrilled to have that done and running. And it was a struggle for me, I think, mainly because I'm not familiar with working with cores in Node. When it comes to .NET, we've got some great APIs in ASP.NET Core that make working with cores a little bit easier, a little bit clearer what's happening. So, I feel a lot better about how it's running, and I'm looking forward to more folks installing and trying out the extension we built. All right, I've rambled.
No, that's very good. That's another thing to add to my list of, now that things are calming down a bit for me, things to take a look at.
I've got to write blog posts explaining here's how this thing works and all that. So
yeah.
Hey,
well, let me jump into the community links because we have got a few. So let me switch over. Let me share my screen. There we go. There's the links. I'll also put them in the chat, so they will be faxed to your supervisors. Okay. There it is. Cool. All right. Well, so let's jump. Ooh, I'm going to switch this up to this layout here. And then I will get rid of the banner. Okay. I think this is going to work.
Yeah.
So first of all, we have, this is what was keeping us busy yesterday. This is this modern web development with .NET 6. So we've got a list of things. And there's one a week. So we've done, the first one was Myra and Scott Hanselman, and the second one we just did yesterday with Blazor. So, and they go on through when December 13. So, and this is our team that's doing these. So a lot of fun. And these are interactive. They're kind of beginner focused. So, we're definitely like answering questions. And I think we took some relatively, some sort of advanced questions during the one yesterday. But it's the main focus is kind of a get started feel. So good stuff. While we're on the subject of learn, we've got so Jeff, you just shipped this, you and the team. So this is an entire learning path for building applications with Blazor.
Yep, so 6 modules. Going to get you. It's going to get you in. Get started with building components, building component libraries, packaging those libraries, working with forms, working with layouts, routing, and it does. All of these are concepts that work whether you're building with Blazor for WebAssembly building with Blazor for server, or even in the future, building with Blazor for .NET MAUI.
Ah, very cool. And these are, the kind of the format to these. There's you go through and you learn some stuff, which is good. So, we show you code samples and all that. And then there's some hands-on learning. And so it'll show you, going and building an application. And this is building on Blazing Pizza with .NET 6, right?
Yep, absolutely. So we wanted to kind of keep one application that we were kind of building on and extending and adding new features to. So by taking those steps and staying around the same app, hopefully things feel familiar and it looks like a real app that you're building. You're not going through and it's the same sample code or different sample code that's all disjointed and not really helping you learn how to build a real application.
Yeah, that's cool. And so you get to, through the course of this, because you're cloning from the previous step, so you can actually build out to a real application through the course of this.
Yep.
So, very cool. Quick ad for something that I got to contribute to a little bit. These are the minimal API learning path. So this has you start with, building from scratch, and then goes up through building an entire full stack application. This is based on content that the team wrote, the minimal API team wrote, and we work with them, got permission to turn it into Learn modules. So for instance, in this one, you'll go through and you'll actually build a React app that points to a minimal API backend. So, very, very cool stuff. So this is showing that kind of hookup stuff and taking it a little bit deeper than some of the, Hello World samples you may have seen.
I can't wait till we get to talk a little bit more about minimal API. This is an interesting topic, and I'm thrilled that we have a learning path that teaches folks more about it.
Yep, cool. Yeah, it is interesting, and I am that's something I'm working with David, Damien, and team of getting a minimal API deep dive lined up, where we actually kind of go deeper into how it's built and how to build more complex applications. So.
That sounds like an oxymoron, a minimal deep dive.
Right. I know. Well, I guess stick around and find out.
Yeah. All right.
One last Learn module I have to point out. This one's from David Pine, and here he replaced client-side polling with ASP.NET Core SignalR with in an application. So this is where he's going through and just showing how to convert that over. So I thought that was pretty cool. He just takes, and this is with a Blazor web application. So
okay.
Yeah, so he works through converting client-side polling to SignalR.
It's interesting. I was using a web app the other day, and I'm not gonna name the name of the company that made it, but my father, who owns a pizza parlor, you might know his name, John. Anyways, he they have it. I'm not naming any names, but they have a cool feature where you can actually track and see the driver driving and delivering to your house, but it does it with polling. It's refreshing a JavaScript file that has, here's the current GPS coordinates of the vehicle. And I'm looking at that and thinking, why not do that with WebSockets or SignalR?
Yep. I hear you.
So I might have to call my father there and make a suggestion.
So, comment from Brave Cobra, still not a fan of minimal APIs. I hear you. It applies. It's when I've talked to the team, what they've said is that designed these, they've said that, they're really focusing more on the getting started and the microservice scenarios. So those are the kind of real sweet spots. If you're building a more complex application, then sure, you've still got Razor Pages, MVC, you've got, the kind of more structured approaches. But I've helped teach some complete beginners lately, and it's hard to explain, okay, no, you need a model, but that's not the actual model you pass to the view. You need a view model, and you need this, and here's how routing works, and it's a lot of stuff.
Let's put a pin in that conversation and come back to it, because it looks like you got some really
I've got
cool
a lot.
links
Let me
here.
rip through these a little bit faster. This one is cool. I just saw this come by. I think this is Ram, and he is writing up getting started with social authentication with ASP.NET Core. So just a walkthrough. I like to call out these, when people do a walkthrough, and here he's just showing setting up OIDC and, doing the social authentication. So nice kind of just stepping through the code, explaining things as he goes. So
Cool.
Nice one. This one, I just saw this float by. I thought this was neat. This is from Rob Connery, who's always dreaming up mad and insane with things that just could work. And so inspired by Heroku, he created AZX. And so it's a Heroku style wrapper for the Azure CLI. So what the idea here is that you could, go through and from the command line, and he walks through. His example is actually using Django, but works with all the other Azure sorts of things. So here he goes through and creates all the things like a resource group, creates Redis cache database, and then packages as a project. So he's got this .azure project and publishes it. And then the idea here is, just let me see. The title says something is ASP. Maybe I misspelled something.
Is that on the URL list?
Could be. Let's see. AS. No, I don't know where it is.
Yeah, the Twitch title looks right.
Yeah.
No, we're good on the Twitch title.
All right. I don't know.
Yeah.
All right, moving on. This one's neat. Michael Washington.
Oh my gosh.
Had you seen this refactoring? I was not aware this exists. So in Blazor, this is a light bulb refactoring. And here he's taking the code and refactoring that to a separate file.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I knew you could do that, but I've just always been doing this manually. So that's just neat to see that as a refactoring.
I remembered seeing that it was in one of the Visual Studio 2022 previews. It was like, oh yeah, now this is available to you. And it's one of those things I forget about because I don't move code back and forth often.
Yeah.
So
I can see as you're building a more complex thing, or you want to do some refactoring, or like you pointed out in our stream yesterday, Jeff, if you want to do some more like testing or that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. One more tweet that's kind of neat. This is, I didn't mean to rhyme, but so Rico just tweeting the NSWAG supporting .NET 6. So the templates include Swashbuckle, but they also, there's support for NSWAG, and this is really cool. So in order to use NSWAG and Swagger UI, just adding in the reference and then saying use Swagger UI 3. So.
Yeah, that open API interactions that you want. So you generate a client and have a rich interaction with an HTTP API, a RESTful interaction. So easy to do with these tools. My gosh.
And that's a big thing. That client code generation is really cool. So, I mean, the Swagger UI page is nice, but actually generating client code that's kept up to date with your contract there is really cool.
Oh, and right, customizing, adding documentation to those so it looks like it's yours and not that generic documentation page.
Yep.
Folks at Marvel did that real nice. They have an implementation of this. Really cool to be able to interact with.
Cool. All right. Andrew Locke continuing his series. Here he's just looking through analyzers for ASP.NET Core in .NET 6. So analyzers are something that I think is often overlooked. It's something that I really appreciate when a team goes the extra mile to add these in. So there are a lot of kind of common patterns, things you can do slightly wrong. Some of these are kind of warnings, or some of these are things where, hey, you really need to fix this. And so just these are some of the ones for .NET 6. And some of these are things where it's like, hey, consider doing this. One that I really liked is this use authorization. I don't know if you've ever gotten bit by this before, Jeff. I definitely have, where I wired up my middleware wrong and the authorization no longer worked. Right?
I love that there's analyzers that look at the order of things in configure and help out with that. I'm always tripping up on that type of thing as I go and add additional stuff into the default configuration.
Yep. One other thing here that I like is they also have, so things like routing, and updating. As you update your code, the patterns change, and so there's recommendations there. One nice thing that he points out here is that there's also some analyzers for minimal APIs. So, things about what you're returning or not using bind attributes or stuff like that.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Speaking of minimal APIs, just a little more. Damian Edwards has this extensions project out on GitHub and just shows a set of extensions and helpers that you can use for some more advanced things. Good stuff. ODG, I don't know if you've followed along. ODG does these. He's got this practical ASP.NET Core repo.
Okay.
Tons of samples, and these are very targeted samples. So they'll show you how to do just one thing.
Wow.
So here, for instance, a route constraint using a decimal. Just one small focused scenario. But a lot of the time, that's exactly what you need. And one thing that I love about the way he runs his project is he updates these very quickly. So there's constant updates, and like right when .NET 6 came out, these were all updated. So
nice.
A lot of good stuff. All right, getting into some of the like official posts. So we've got this Azure AD Gateway on .NET 6. What's neat here, people will say like, who uses .NET? Is it, what's the scale? And what's really neat to see here, like this is serving 185 billion requests a day. And this is stuff that makes Microsoft money. So this is Office.com, Outlook, Azure, Xbox.
Did you say 185 million requests a day?
Billion with a B.
Billion?
Billion.
Okay, that's not a toy. That's some serious requests. Okay.
It's serious, and it's also serious from like, this is not just like hey, we're tracking our gift exchange or whatever. This is like, if it's down, it costs some money, right? And so this is something Microsoft cares about. And so what's neat is that they are, they'll test things. And so they're using .NET 6. They're using PGO, Platform Guided Optimization, or Profile Guided Optimization. And so showing how that, Profile Guided Optimization. So this is showing how this is, saving, like making substantial improvements. So their application efficiency went up by 50%. So that's pretty darn crazy. So anyhow, it's neat always to see how people are using this stuff in the real world. And they walk through and explain some things. Here's how we're doing it. Here's how PGO worked for us. So
yeah, that's definitely something of note, right?
Very cool stuff. I think this post is good for like convince your boss, and then also if you are actually doing something at scale, this is something I would want to look at and like,
oh my gosh,
check out what they're doing here.
Right? Like we had the post about Bing migrating to .NET 5. These are no joke services that are out there and running.
Yeah, you're right. All right. So now .NET Monitor, I think there was a session on this at .NET Conf.
There was.
So .NET Monitor is very cool. This is a way where you can monitor running applications. And, this is available as a container image and CLI tool. And then what's neat here is it just exposes this API, and then you can call into it and you can get your, in a way that's not disrupting your application. You can go and say like, just get me, some metrics, get me live metrics or logs.
I want to see how this fits together with Azure Functions, because I've got a number of Azure Functions apps out there that run on .NET 6. I'd love to see a little bit further deep dive on how I can put those two together.
Yeah. And we've had Saurabh on a few times, at least once, talking about .NET Monitor, but that'd be an interesting question next time he's on. YARP, I don't know if you've looked at YARP much, but so what's interesting with YARP is it is code. It runs in .NET. It is a layer 7 proxy instead of a layer 4. So it understands more stuff. It can understand more things about what's actually going on in the context. So what's really neat with this is if you want to write code that is doing, is making decisions, is running kind of more at the middleware level, that allows you to do that.
So this strikes me as something that I would use in the same way as a reverse proxy, a front door, Azure front door type of application. My question is, where do I run that in Azure? Is it an app service? Is it an Azure container instance? What is it? Like,
yeah. So I should remember this. We had them on before. My understanding is this is more like you would run it actually in process in your application.
oh,
So you can run this actually in like an ASP.NET Core application, and it can be handled at that level. You can also, I think, run as a worker. Yeah. So I forget. I would need to look at this again.
I'm curious because it feels like not a competitor, but for something that I would run in the same place as Azure Front Door. And how does that fit in?
Yeah, and my understanding is that the big difference is this is more like it is more running .NET code. And so as opposed to something like Azure Front Door, where you're going to be defining rules that are a little more higher level, this is something where you're actually going to be understanding something, integrating more with, say, like your authentication, or, like you already know more about what's going on in your app.
I see Sebastian's here on YouTube recommending running in a VM or a container. Yeah, see, I look at Azure Front Door, and I'm not a network engineer, so configuring Azure Front Door, I don't know how to do. And it's for folks who are network engineers and those kinds of folks, makes perfect sense to them, I'm sure. But for me as a developer, I'm going to write .NET code that defines how to route my stuff. So this feels right up my alley as a developer to build something and use to solve that problem of routing between different services. Yeah, write your own load balancer, reverse proxy. Exactly, Brave.
Exactly, yeah.
Yep.
And that was the thing that stuck out to me from talking to them before, is, for instance, being able to integrate with middleware. So that sort of feel where it's more kind of integrated deeply in.
Yeah. Code with Sean on Twitch points out that Azure Front Door is a global service routing traffic to apps, where YARP would be just whatever instance you have that VM or container on. Totally agree. And it also doesn't have the caching CDN capabilities that Azure Front Door does. So not quite the same feature set.
Cool. All right. Just a couple left here. This is just a reminder that the .NET Conf code and slides are up. There's a little bit of, like, not all the, some of them you actually need to watch, and in the video they'll say, hey, here's the GitHub link or something. So we're still working on updating this, but for definitely the slides for most of them, especially the ones that are more slide heavy. And then this is where anytime code is posted, this is where this will go to. And to get to this, you can go to .NET.conf.net, and there's a link, slides and demos. So anyways, for people that are asking, and for myself as I'm following along, sometimes when I'll watch these videos, I'll go through and I'll just have the slides there, because they'll have the links or things directly in them. Yeah,
be able to click through. Yeah.
All right, so the actual stuff we wanted to talk about.
Here it is.
This is, we can kind of go wherever we want, but we have this mega post on .NET or on .NET 6, and then we've also got the announcement for ASP.NET Core with .NET 6. I'll put you on the spot, Jeff. What are some of your favorite things?
Honestly, the JavaScript code generation for serialization. That is a massive performance improvement when you think about all the APIs that we have out there that you build with ASP.NET Core that can now use that already generated code for serialization and sending data back and forth in JSON format. That just improves that system text JSON serializer and takes the performance of what was already running really fast, because it was using in-memory spans to generate the the strings. It just kicked it up a notch. So now it's not using reflection to go and find things. It's already constructed. It's using pre-written code. Look at that performance improvement. 40% performance improvement just for you switching and using the source-generated serializer.
Yeah. I just love the whole idea of source generators because it's like we've gotten used to in the .NET world of like we're running on a managed runtime and it's going to try and do some smarts with garbage collection and using machine intrinsics and stuff like that. But it's always going to be, there's always some things that get in the way. There's only so much you can do when the app's running. What's really cool here, this is when your app compiles, then it's able to build these serializers for you, serialization and deserialization code. And it's 40%. That's crazy.
And we see a similar feature with Entity Framework getting the ability to do optimize and generate some source for all of your models and how they interact with and query and work with the database. This idea of removing reflection from .NET 6, let's generate some of that code up front. It's only going to lead to better performance without us having to write additional code. Great stuff there.
And there's some interesting things in here like that I was reading about, like, the code that runs at runtime needs to be safe and make the safest choices all the time by default. Like they don't want to crash. It's got to be very careful. But code that you're compiling ahead of time, you can actually be a little more strict with it, and it's okay to get a compile error if something doesn't work right. And so, it's nice to be able to make that trade-off and be more aggressive.
A couple questions that have come in over here on YouTube chat. Let's touch on those real quick. Guy Incognito, let me go to his question. I'm going to click that one up for us here. Is the podcast demo app available on GitHub yet? We're still working on this. There is a little bit of cleanup that they want to do to that source code before it's published to make sure that everything's open source, and that it is legit, it is available. Whenever we open source software at Microsoft, we got to have somebody do a final pass through it just to make sure all the licensing is right and that it's correct. But it should be available very soon. I believe it's in the last review. So
every time I've heard lately, it's like, oh, we're almost done. So
yeah. There was also a question. Isaac asked that question as well. There was also a question, speaking of the JSON serializer, here from Alexander asking, well, is it possible to do source generator for the XML serializer? I don't think the XML serializer had that same type of feature wired up, mostly because folks primarily use the JSON serializer, but this isn't too bad a suggestion to also bring it around to the XML serializer. And
that reminds me, so there's this XML serializer generator that's actually been around for a little bit. And I don't know if
that's the same thing.
How that's related.
Do you want to
SGen?
Should we put up your screen there?
Yeah, I guess so. Right. And if anyone's familiar, it's not something I
haven't used it. I'm not working with XML. I primarily work with JSON, but it says for the .NET framework. I'm not familiar with it.
Something I don't know. The thing I was actually thinking when I searched this is there are a lot of source generators. There's actually like a repo that tracks cool source generators out there. And so that's also somewhere I would look to, to dig into that too.
Cool. Very cool.
I think, JSON is something where like definitely JSON performance. It's something where people see a lot of like, I don't know. It's one of the Tech and Power benchmarks for a reason. I think it's something where parsing and dealing with a lot of JSON is important for a lot of modern web apps. So
sure. And when I think about my code isn't changing when it interacts with those APIs. So why not generate as much of that as possible that I can to work with and pull down and make that deserialization process even faster. I want to get as much of that into my Blazor app so that the Blazor application running in WebAssembly isn't thinking and doing reflection in the browser. Oh man, that's a time waster that I don't want to touch.
Yeah, that's a big deal. And like you're saying, like a lot of modern applications are you're either you've got a loading screen, or worse, you've got like just an empty screen while you're waiting for the app to load.
Yeah.
Which gives me a chance to call out. I should have like a little banner for this. One of John's things that drives me nuts is when they put improper loading text. Let me give you an example.
Improper
You go to your bank
text.
and it says balance $0. And then it waits, and then it's like, no, it's actually, you're a billionaire, right? But the problem is they shouldn't put any, they should say loading. They should say, connecting to whatever.
Dash for the balance, right?
Sure. But I've seen things like your shopping cart is empty, 0 items or whatever. And then it updates, and it's like, put the code, put what's there, expecting that it might never load, right? That's just John's little rant of the day.
Totally agree. Have an appropriate loading state that is neutral. That we're.
But going back to what you were saying, that JSON loading is important for giving that kind of great experience, especially with these front end apps.
Yep, absolutely. Brave Cobra points out on Twitch that the gRPC server and client, they're source generated based on the proto files.
Good point. Yeah.
Yep. Very good point.
That's if somebody looks that up, that link, well, I guess they can't post links in there. There was a list I've seen kind of recently, and it was like all these cool source generators, because people are doing some really cool experiments with them.
Yeah.
Another thing that's really cool is hot reload. I mean, just the ability to, like, as you're coding, we did this yesterday during our Blazor class, but so some things with that is I'm training myself to not type .NET run or .NET watch run, but just type .NET watch. And then it's going to, just continue updating and I may occasionally hit a root edit, which is something where it's not able to refresh. But the magical thing about it is how it preserves state, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I may be like halfway through filling out a big form. I'm working on validation. I correct my code, and the page I don't lose all my state. I don't lose my click stream or any of that. It continues off from where it was. So.
Yeah. And hot reload in Visual Studio, it works with a lot more things than you might expect. So where I've been using and really enjoying using hot reload is in debugging Azure Functions apps that I've been building.
Mm.
So F5 run the Azure Function app. It's running in the emulated environment locally, but as I make changes to my repository objects or to my models or to the APIs that I've been building in those Azure functions, they immediately pick up the new technique and start working appropriately.
Yeah.
You wouldn't expect it there because there is no user interface thing to update, but it just starts working with whatever your new code is. Really enjoying using that. It's been a big productivity boost because stopping and restarting Azure Functions apps is a pain in the neck.
Yeah.
Restarting that emulator and all. So.
Yeah. And that's a good reminder that the emulator working locally really does work well. I tend to think of Azure as a service that's off in the cloud. And I think of this like I'm debugging against the cloud, but working against the emulator locally, like, really does make that pretty smooth.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, we already did talk about minimal APIs quite a bit. There's async streaming.
Hang on, let's get in and talk about that. Can we unpack this a little bit? I hear folks say, "Oh, I don't like that," or "I don't like the new templates."
Yeah.
Here's the thing: minimal APIs have been around since ASP.NET Core 1. It's been in the configure. You've been able to do this where you're saying map get, map post. It's been available inside the configure pipeline, right? The configure method of your startup class since ASP.NET Core 1.0.
That's a fair point. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just because we eliminated the startup file and allowed that all to live and be created in that one program CS file, it's now bubbled up so that you can do those all in one place.
Yeah.
So
that is true. And I do remember that about the first kind of demos that we were seeing. It's like, hey, here's middleware, and here we can here you can return hello world, and here you can do this.
Mm-hmm.
But then let's throw that all out and let's do map MVC and map this and map, you know,
Right.
whatever, right?
So and I appreciate folks don't like the single file program CS and top level statements. I appreciate that folks aren't too thrilled with that. They prefer to build things the old way. And those templates are available. That you can find them, you can get them back in. You can even .NET new and point back to the old versions if you have the older SDKs there. They're around.
Yeah.
Well,
another thing too is you can make your own templates with .NET.
Exactly.
And Syed did a session at Build or at Build at .NET Conf.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's done them at Build too, but and that is something I've done talks on this before, where I would say like, hey, here's all the tweaks I do in a new ASP.NET application, you know, turning on logging and, you know, setting this up and some best practices. And then at the very end, I'll say, now let's save this out as a template, and you can create a template. And then the same way you do .NET new web app, I can say .NET new John app, you know? Mm-hmm. So if you do want, you know, if you do want to keep program and startup separate and all that sort of stuff, you still can. I will say that it's so rare. When I was thinking of this teaching someone recently, it's so rare that I ever make a change to program CS.
Exactly. Yeah.
I used to have to for things like entity framework scaffolding or, you know, some kind of weird sort of workarounds, but it's so rare that I need to do that now. So I don't miss it.
Our good friend, the late Scott Allen, he was showing at one point in some of his videos a way that and even on his blog, a way that he was taking parts of Startup CS at the time and throwing those out as separate files. Yes. So that when it did come time to modify and update just the things around your configuration for the service locator, right? You wouldn't configure dependency injection. Well, that was sitting in another file. So just like you're saying, John, you weren't modifying program CS. You weren't modifying startup CS. It was over there in the configure services CS. And it was one really big file that had, here's all the services for my project. I feel like there's a similar practice that hasn't been discussed in our community yet of, let's take those minimal APIs and let's put them into a minimal API config CS or something like that. So it's just, so we're passing in app and it's literally just app map get all in one file and it's over there somewhere, so that just like you're saying, we don't need to modify program CS. We're not changing how the application starts directly, but for the purposes of better source code isolation, we're not changing things at the high level.
And I get that, and we've had some of those discussions because they're looking at that like, okay, we've got a good 101 level story, and then we've also got a pretty good like 301 level story. We're talking at the college level, whatever the way they do. So we have a good beginner story now with minimal APIs, and we have an advanced one. But how do we do this? Like, how do you get from I've built an app using the simple stuff to something a little more complex? And then refactoring, and I could see something like an analyzer or refactoring thing that says like, move my map gets to another file, or some sort of thing.
A file with a static method, configure minimal APIs, boom, and it's in one place. And then you'd be able to also unit test some of those, right? By reach over and inspect, are these things configured? Options become available at that point.
And like I was looking, I worked on, let me see if I've got a handy pizza store. I have one where I can see the need to think about like, how do you want to refactor? And I'll give the example if I can move this over to the screen. So here's one, right? And I've got an application and it's an API, and then I set up Swagger. And then I start adding in a bunch of endpoints, right? And this is the part where in my mind, I start thinking like, hey, I probably want to refactor this, and it wouldn't be a big deal to do that. I could put these in another class and pass in the app to that class and do those things, right? But,
yeah. So. Just to help with organization, using standard C# class method calls and just move it somewhere where it's a little bit cleaner, a little bit more organized. I think of some of those practices folks talk about where, you should only have 7 lines of code per method.
Yeah.
And when I look at, you've got a set of tremendous APIs here that are doing a lot of great work. I love that you've got all your CRUD methods all stacked right above each other like that. That's really cool to be able to read. Would it be better organization to just take those and put them in another class file, and we just call app.configure whatever, right?
Yeah.
Configure minimal APIs, and it's just an extension method somewhere else.
So the two things they talk about, one is this is a half-hour, 40-minute learning .NET project. So this is something where creating 5 new files and doing all that is maybe wasting some time. Another thing, though, that's interesting is the performance impact, because by moving to a minimal API for something like a microservice, we don't need all the abstractions of like, hey, we're pulling in all these filters and we're pulling on all these,
controllers,
conditional things we might use and injecting stuff here and there. It's just like, no, it's all kind of right here.
So, all right. The Razor runtime doesn't get launched, doesn't get bootstrapped. So, yep.
I'll show you one other thing that's been interesting for me with .NET 6 is, well, this one is a little bit, normally when I did file new, that's what I see is this right here. And the thing that's bitten me, okay, so I love the implicit usings. That's nice. This Nullable, totally, I'm having to rethink my code a bit more because Nullable is on by default now. And so it's doing that null checking. And that's the thing.
I'm not ready to think that way yet as a .NET developer.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you. I'm having to, like, okay, so, and then I'll like pass it around. Okay, fine. Let's make the string nullable. Okay, now my, like my constructors need to think about that. And, it's just all the way up the thing. So it's good. It's another thing to think about.
I don't like that all of my strings now have an orange underline on it. Oh, that's null. You're not handling
right.
Oh, there's another string. That's not null. Like,
so I'm not arguing with Jason. Like, I should be checking my nulls better. It's making me be a better coder, but it's when I'm trying to bang out some code real quick, it's making me think about it earlier on.
I'm not in that mode and that model of thinking yet. It's going to take me some time to get converted there. Our friend and member of the .NET engineering team, James Clancy, he's another live streamer you can find over on Twitch. He was telling me that this is something he really struggles with because they turned on Nullable across all of the .NET BCL. All of the runtime has Nullable turned on because they want to improve the quality. Yeah. So now what? It's a different way to think that we haven't been facing for 20 years of .NET now.
Yeah.
And
it's something where, I wonder if like in more intelligent analyzers could say like, hey, you've got this. Why don't I do this for you? Because there's some standard patterns and there are some docs about turning on Nullable in your application and migrating over to, like strictly enforcing null checking. But it is definitely like I don't know. Right now, it's just like, oh, come on, get out of the way. I'm trying to get this done. So, yeah. Oh, speaking of null checking, this is a great one. I don't know if you've seen this one. Argument null exception, throw if null. So I don't need to do like if this, blah, blah, blah. I can just say throw if null and pass it something.
Yeah.
I'm really liking that one. That's a good one.
Yeah, that just kind of makes sense. I'm not familiar with Wizards is asking about the check for overflow feature. I'm not familiar with that feature.
I'm not either.
Sorry, I'm
all right. Maybe you can look that up while I talk about.
Yeah, let me quick bingle for that.
Okay, there's this is good here, and this is interesting. So this whole dynamic PGO, and I am in no way an expert, so I will be an internet professor and talk about what I've read only. But the idea was that profile guided optimization. In the past, you had to make some more strict decisions about, like, do I use profile guided optimization? And if I do, you take some more hits as your code starts up. And it has to also make some choices about, like, this is going to take too long to optimize, so I'm not going to optimize it. Yeah. Or, and so it had to make some best guesses about, optimizing your code. With dynamic PGO, it's able to optimize as the code's running. And so it's able to, over time, say, like, hey, this application, like, this loop is never executed with more than this many, we can unroll it, or whatever, and so you can make some more advanced optimizations. So there's definitely, like, I've already probably said 10 wrong things, but Jose, I would check out this blog post and check that out. And then also that one that we mentioned about Azure AAD, because they have some specific things. Where was that? Here, where they talked about, here's what worked for us, and how they enabled dynamic PGO. So I think this is also something, like, this is ASP.NET Community Stand-Up, and I'm a web dev. This is something you'll hear more about, like, on the language and tooling community stand-ups, which are on Thursdays. So.
And dynamic PGO is something that I've heard the .NET team talk about. They're investing a lot of time in to make sure that you get better optimized applications when you build.
I will say that I really love it's been something happening over the past few years. Like, performance has been an important feature for .NET Core and .NET recent releases. But I love things like some of these, like, deep computer science things that they're focusing, like, for instance, there's machine intrinsics, and there's, like, stuff like this, like, advanced optimizations, and then, like, tree shaking for Blazor, and just, like, some really cool things to, it's like, push things pretty deep.
Yeah, the move to use more value types, record structs, encouraging struct use a little bit more is only going to mean that you're not thrashing memory with reference types as much. Thank you. Jason pointed out the feature that Wizards was asking about is the check for overflow underflow compiler flag that you can add, and it's effectively you dropping the checked block around content. This is something that if you've attended one of Kathleen's advanced C# workshops, she really harps on. Bill Wagner, our friend Bill Wagner, does this as well in his workshops. And the idea is there's a bunch of weird things that happen when you add 1 to int.max value. What happens when you just go past max value? Weird stuff happens. And same thing with decimal, same thing. So the idea is there's now a compiler flag that will raise an exception, because it doesn't always raise an exception when you tinker with that inside of C#, or you tinker with the max value or the minimum value of one of the data types. So there's now a compiler flag that will raise an exception appropriately if you hit those scenarios. And Kathleen had mentioned that at some point, I'm not sure where that announcement is, Wizards. If you could provide a link to where that announcement is, that they were going to turn that on by default in new projects, and it's not in the new template. I would want to backtrack and see where that got dropped in the process, because that does feel like a good feature for folks to turn on. And I'd like to learn more about the decision process for turning on some of those features, because Nullable went through that process, and we turned on the Nullable checking, much to our chagrin, and those of us who've been doing coding with Null for 20 years. But it's nice to have those guardrails around how you're working with data types, so things don't look and behave weird.
Like you said too, it's definitely something where the teams at Microsoft feel your pain too, because, like you said, we've turned that on, and it uncovers all sorts of things. And it's like, oh shoot, we're not null checking this feature, and so there's a lot of like all throughout the and I saw this happen too previously with like spans, and when spans came out, then they're like, okay, let's use this all throughout, all the string classes and all that, and really made some big changes there.
Oh yeah. I see a handful of questions coming in on some slightly off topic things. Do you want to go through and answer a couple of those?
Well, sure. Let me see. There's one about securing an application. Secure your API so it's not compromised with Angular.
So the way I read that is Angular is a compromise?
Well, I think that the idea there is Angular is a front-end client, right? And you're calling into a back-end API. And
no, they clearly said Angular is a security problem. That's how I read that, John. You shouldn't be using Angular. You need to be using Blazor.
There you go.
I kid. I would need more on the context of that.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, like, that's something I will say that it is something where when you are developing, like a lot of web developers are immediately like, you got to use React or Angular. You kind of also then need to be an expert in a few things, right? And you need to be an expert. You need to understand that how authentication is working on that.
Yeah.
So
there was a question, how long we're scheduled for? We're only scheduled for an hour on this.
Yeah. So sometimes we go a little bit long, but that's fine. We don't have any kind of strict amount of content to cover.
Nope.
So,
nope.
Yeah. One thing that I did want to mention that I think is pretty cool is the SPA templates got some updates. I don't know. It's kind of not like single page apps. So I feel like this doesn't get a huge amount of attention. So we just got a question about Angular, and there are a lot of applications built with Angular and React, and I really like the update that they made to the templates with this. So with .NET 6, instead of the ASP.NET Core like hosting and proxying to your Angular application, it kind of flips that around. And so now when you create a new Angular application and run it, it actually pops up a console window and it's running the Angular front end, and it's proxying back to your back end. And so definitely kind of gets out of your way a lot more. And then, for anyone that like, if you're doing any kind of more complex Angular React, front end work, you've got all your NPM stuff. You pop right into that directory, and it's not like kind of integrated deeply with ASP.NET Core. It's kind of run as a separate, here's your Angular folder, do what you want,
Yeah.
So that's definitely a nice thing. There's a session Javier was on. I think we'll try and have him back on again soon. And we did a ASP.NET community stand-up earlier this year where he went through and showed that. Let me see what else is exciting and new.
So new Blazor features, Blazor optimized, better compression, better performance coming out of Blazor with .NET 6. I love seeing error boundaries. That's something that I'm glad it doesn't take down the entire application and stop things. Something I'm looking forward to sprinkling into a Blazor application or two. Control HTML head content is something that I felt terrible. I felt like I was stuffing the bag, just throwing all the JavaScript references in the HTML head. Like, I don't know if I'm going to need it, but we're going to put it there.
Yeah.
You might not navigate to that page, but it's here. So
there's a lot of really cool stuff here. This render components from JavaScript is pretty neat. So this your components can be like, this can integrate an application in with Angular or React from Blazor. Steve Sanderson's talk was just incredible. Like, absolutely, like, no surprise, but it totally blew my mind. I'm gonna bring up the link for that, because I consider that pretty much like a must see. Just you know what I mean? It was
what I appreciate about how when Steve plans a session, when he plans to teach, he takes a basic concept and he turns it up to 11 in the demo. Okay, now we're going to call some C++ code. I'm not just going to call any C++ code. I'm going to call something that renders and does how much processing live in the browser. And instead of us having to wait how many seconds for it to run, it's going to do it immediately, right now. Boom.
Yeah.
Right? And you can do machine learning in the browser too. When we do it over here in JavaScript, it takes a couple seconds. But when we do it with ML.NET live in the browser, immediate response. It really takes those concepts right off the deep end, but to show you here's the concept and here it is fully implemented. And that's something that I know he spends a lot of time on and planning.
Yeah.
And he times these things out to make sure that he gets the most content filled in the session. Huge respect for Steve and the work he does in teaching in sessions like this.
What I think is amazing is he is so slow and calmed, not rushed, and he just, in the course of a half an hour, just does this mind-blowing stuff. So what was neat with this was he took a Blazor application, he compiled MySQL or SQLite to a WebAssembly native and published with it. So then he's doing searching in the client where it's instantaneous because the data is in the client and it's synchronized with server. So then he shows turning on PWA and taking it offline, and then and so then when it's offline, you can still sort, filter, search, and then when it goes back online, it's connected. And then he integrates it in with, he uses a Rust native DLL, and he uses WinUI. And I mean, it's just like, I don't know, shows it running, with Maui and just like all kinds of, and then he also showed this where he took, he did some more advanced like compilation stuff. So he showed, it showed AOT, and what he did with his AOT was ran a huge number. I forget, he got up to like 70,000 things that he's animating and doing this all using AOT. So yeah, just take a half hour and watch that. It's crazy good. So, let me see. I'm trying to think if there's any other magical, amazing, wonderful thing. We did have one question coming in about Angular, and I just wanted to clarify. This is not the whatever services, JavaScript services. This is .NET New Angular. And when you do that, I'll just show that super quick, and then we can probably wrap soon after that. But here's what I get when I do .NET New Angular. So my application, my Angular app is in this client app folder, and then the rest of the project, the magic is all in my CS proj. And my CS proj now is wired up to work cleanly with Angular. So when I run the application, it's going to, like proxy back. So I'm not gonna do that now because it'll like slow my machine down. But it basically runs them as two separate apps. What's nice with that is here's my client app, and I've got all my stuff that I'm used to as an Angular developer. So for instance, I've got a package JSON, right? And I've got, Karma, and I've got all my stuff. So it's very, very kind of, like if you're doing Angular or React Dev and you're comfortable with that, this is going to be a much smoother way for you to integrate. You could just open this folder and do your node dev stuff there.
Yeah, so build and do the things that you normally do, and the API is just going to be there for you next to it. Really cool stuff.
Very cool. Well, Jeff, I know you've been crazy busy lately, and I totally appreciate your taking an hour to just come on and chat through this with me. And so what do you got planned? What do you have coming up?
This week is actually my Twitch anniversary.
Wow.
It is
how many?
4 years streaming on Twitch.
That is awesome.
Yeah. So I want to try and spend some time tomorrow going through. We sent out, I mentioned the Twitch extension today. I'd like to go through, do some more things to kind of celebrate and take a look at some of the other stuff going on around Twitch. the app that I've been building live on Twitch called Clip Talk is 1 year old this week. So next week, I think we need to do a 1 year celebration and bring in some folks to help add some new features, really open up and fan out and do some new features that use more cool Azure capabilities. I'm going to use Azure Communication Service, Azure SignalR Service, build notification mechanisms, getting ready for December. I'm going to load everything in that Blazor app into .NET MAUI. So that's coming up.
Oh, cool.
But a good chunk of next week, I'm going to spend tuning and getting my sessions ready for Dev Intersection coming up the following week in Las Vegas. I'll be in Las Vegas for the week teaching all about Blazor, all about, and I'm actually going to be talking about minimal API and minimal application structure with the boss. I'm co-presenting with the Scott Hunter.
Nice. That'll be fun.
Yeah. So got to get all that content ready over the next week and a half. Really looking forward to that. But yeah, we'll be busy and delivering some great content over the next 2-3 weeks.
I always like it right after, .NET Visual Studio and everything ships, because like then we get to, we've been writing documentation and tutorials and stuff. We get to do presentations, and we also get to go a little deeper and build some more kind of like integrate these cool features we've been looking at kind of more at the surface level and kind of go deeper with them. So.
Yeah. There's a question in chat. Do I have a hat store? No, I don't. This isn't actually, this isn't one of my hats. This is actually from Penn State. But I do not sell the hats. You can get the logos for some of the hats that I have from the .NET Swag repository, and you can have them embroidered yourself if you'd like.
Nice.
So.
All right. Well, I guess we'll wrap up here. This has been awesome. Thank you everyone for watching. We had a lot of fun. And then we'll kind of be, I'm not sure. We're going to try and do mostly every Tuesday going through the end of the year, but I'm not making huge promises because everyone goes on vacation and it gets hard.
Stuff happens.
All right.
All right.
Well, thanks everyone.
We'll see you next time.